My name is Michael Spavin. Today is October 18th, 2000. I'm here to interview Paul Wolf, who is a child survivor of the Nazi Holocaust. I'm doing this under the auspices of the Holocaust Documentation and Education Center, Incorporated. The purpose of this interview is to add to the oral history of the Holocaust, so that through this living memorial, future generations will know what happened, and with this knowledge, we hope to prevent any such occurrence in the future. Thank you for being here, Mr. Wolf.
You're welcome.
For the record, please state your full name.
Paul Wolf, W-O-L-F.
Okay. And where were you born? The town.
Germany.
And the town?
Want me to spell it?
Yeah.
Flonheim, F-L-O-N-H-E-I-M, near Mainz.
What large city was that near?
Wiesbaden, Frankfurt,
And what was your birth date?
4/4/24.
We're going to begin now by talking a little bit about the town where you grew up in those pre-war years.
Village, that's the difference.
Village.
There's only 1,100 people there. There were.
And out of that 1,100 people that lived there, how many were Jewish?
12 families. So that's, what, 10%?
The non-Jewish population, how did they earn their living, most of the people there?
Most of them were, they were wine farmers. They were in pretty good shape. It was the most fertile wine area as opposed to Germany, because you get the wine. You even get my father's wine.
Most of the Jewish families did the same?
No. There were three. My father was a wine. No, the Jewish family had no farms. The 12 Jewish families were divided among cattle dealers on a small scale, butchers, and my father was the only wine merchant in town, wine manufacturer. We manufactured wine. We bought the wine, the grapes from the farmers. It was entirely wine country. It was a very rich area.
Well, let's talk a little bit.
I don't mean it was a rich area. It was a comfortable. It was not a poor area.
Well, let's talk about your family and how they lived in that town in those years. How many children were in your immediate family?
Two. My sister and myself.
And your sister's name?
And
what was the name of your parents?
Arthur and Santa.
And your mother's maiden name?
Meyer, M-E-I-E-R.
Did your father live in that town for a long time? Did he come from a different part?
All his life.
And your grandfather, where did he live?
Also in that town.
So you have a long history.
Yes, I have a history of 350 years in that area. I checked it out. I don't know if you want me to say this, the village, I say, is known, has been there since Roman times. It was known as a cross area where the Romans watered their horses. The area is still there. As a matter of fact, my grandfather's house, which I've seen 2 years ago, can't be sold because it's under, what is that called, states, under federal. It has a date that goes way back, and it can't be resold anymore, unfortunately.
So, some kind of historical value to the state.
Yeah.
350 years, that's a long time.
You do realize a long time ago, in those days, Germany and the area went through a lot of different non-constitutional governments. So the Jews lived under good times, under hard times, etc., etc. And in those days, you have to remember, 300 years ago, the townspeople didn't have any records. I had a hard time getting a record. But I always remember that the priests and Catholic priests knew how to write, and that's how we got some of the records. And I did some research of my own, not enough.
So your father had a wine manufacturing business.
He started as a cattle dealer in 1929, built a new house, which was a little late already, and went into mine. He was in the wine manufacturing business.
And your mother, did she work?
No, never. She ran his office more.
In that village, what was going to school like for you?
Until 19, I would almost say Hitler came into power in 33, and circumstance which you know. Until that time, I felt no anti-Semitism at all. I was 13 years old. I couldn't go to high school. I started going to high school when I was 12 years. High school is different than here. It's a junior high, because I couldn't go by train to the next town. They would not permit Jews in 1936 to go to town anymore.
They wouldn't permit them to go
couldn't go, they wouldn't let me into the train anymore. So I went by bicycle, it was 10 miles away. But the teachers who taught me, Jews lost their job in the high school, and I took private lessons in French, the wrong language. I should have learned English at the time. And, yeah.
What about your Jewish education?
Not too much. You have to remember that the rabbis and, the rabbis and cantors in Germany were paid by the federal government, but you know about that. We had no rabbi. Every week once the cantor came, and until Bar Mitzvah time taught us, which we didn't like to go, not like today's children. My grandchildren loved to go to Hebrew school. We didn't like because the teachers were tough. The Jewish teachers were tough. We were hit. They actually used the old, like the German teachers did. That's about it. But we learned. We learned well. Schools were excellent.
What was your level? What was the level of observance that your parents had?
You mean Jewish observance, Hebrew observance? My parents and grandparents were, when I say very religious, they were good Jews, but not running to, there was no shul except on the holidays. We had no minyan on Shabbos in the synagogue, but we did go on all the, we hired a cantor, so that's all they could afford in that village. What was my level? That's about it, but I know my Jewish history, my Hebrew history. I learned that well over there.
As you were growing up in those early pre-war years, and things were beginning to happen in Germany, ominous things were beginning to happen. Hitler was gaining power. I know you were a young boy. I'm just wondering if you remember
everything.
What was the feeling like in the house? What was your father talking about? 1933, Hitler gained power. This
may sound peculiar. The luckiest thing was, luckiest the wrong word, the most advantageous thing was when he was arrested in 1933, 34, and sent to, it wasn't called concentration camp, 25 miles away. It's called Osthof, Osthofen. And one of the guards, or at a later time, he was arrested once later on. By the way, they used to use means not legal to put him in jail. What it was is one of the guards there was a buddy of his during the Second World War, and he said to him, and I can practically quote it, "You Jews have no future in Germany, leave." And starting in 1934, my grandmother, who lived on the Swiss border, used to call up her brother over here, and it took 3 years, and he got us out, thank God. Had we stayed in France, we went from Le Havre, I remember everything, we would have been killed. Just the French, you know what they've done also. That's another story.
Well, in this period, as you're still living with your family and
Yeah.
and Hitler's gaining power, was your father or any other family members of any kind of political or social organization that you remember?
To the political organization, which he was well known, he was a leader of the county. He couldn't belong to it anymore. He stayed away. He learned. He stayed away from all organizations. Any organization. He was too well known, and it was too. No, it wasn't that. You just couldn't belong in the village. Everybody knew what you were doing.
When you say he couldn't belong, the reason for that is what?
You mean Jewish organization? What are you talking about?
Yeah, any kind of organization, yeah.
He had enough sadness and suffered enough being in jail a couple of times that he said, it's best if we stay in the background until we leave here, so we entail no problems. Because it didn't take much for the German local government, who hated by now in '36 the Jews, to send you to Dachau, which was a local, or Buchenwald. And they used every means. It happens that his former partner, who naturally wanted a business, became the Nazi leader, I won't use the German word, in the village. There was no law. There was no law. Luckily,
It was up to the village leader to decide
oh sure,
how he treated the Jews.
yeah, I could tell you something, but it has to be off the record, so I can't include it here. How my father used certain pressures. He knew certain things about the leader of the town, and that's what kept him. Okay?
Did you see any incidents of mistreatment of the other Jewish families, of men that you said there were 12 other families in town? Do you remember what happened to them?
Yes. I don't have the records with me. Most of them, by some means, were able to stay in the village until 1941. We left enough money. We had a couple of houses in Fronheim, the village we lived in, for my grandfather. We tried to get him out. It didn't work. I have to blame partly the American representatives over there. That's another story which I won't go into. And I can document what I say. 187 people from the area. Now when I say area, from the county surrounding, were arrested. I have to get the records home. They're available anytime, and were sent, young and old, they were sent. We were gone already. It's in 41 now I'm talking about. It's strange that they were able to remain in the village. Some had left before. I don't know exactly who had left. I know some, and some remained. And a few families, quite a few families, were transported east via another large town, and they ended up in Theresienstadt, and some of them in Auschwitz. My grandfather died under circumstances that I don't know in Theresienstadt. 76 years. He was born 1868. He was removed from the town, arrested. I could never find out who arrested him, but they were smart. They used out-of-town SS and Gestapo agents to arrest, so they made sure that there could be no favoritism. That's about it.
The events surrounding your father's arrest the first time, do you remember that when they came and got him?
No. I was in 33, 34. I was born 20. I was only 7 years old. I remember everything else. But they arrested him after that. He was wine manufacturer. They used, he may have committed an infraction in the wine business, which would have normally cost $1,000 fine. They used that to arrest him, you know, and we were lucky. We were just lucky. Not lucky that we that my father wasn't sent away permanently until, but I want to tell you, he had a little power, and the power he had was quite great, or he wouldn't have, he would not have. I cannot mention that at this time, or at any time.
Do you remember what that was like when he was away? You said he was gone for a year, 2 years?
He was gone for a year and a half once, and they didn't call them camp, they were prisons.
Right. So, do you remember what that was like for you, your family, your sister?
Strangely enough, it wasn't too bad at all. We had a couple of houses, and I stayed with my grandfather a lot of times, my mother, and stayed in a house nearby, but I loved my grandfather. It may be strange to say, it's unforgivable what happened to my grandfather, that he remained, but I have to say this, I have to commend a certain non-Jewish family in Germany who took care of him in the middle of the night, otherwise they wouldn't have been able to survive. He had to bury his own wife in 40. I forgot when my grandmother died. Nobody would bury her. Another Jew went up, or in the middle of the night, they got someone. And the records in the village have been destroyed of the data, but I got hold of the records too. I got through the county, I did a lot of work. And as a matter of fact, I am now in contact with the town. And I asked them one question. I says, the town was basically, the village was basically, even after the war, democratic. Why didn't you people put up, like other towns, a small memorial in honor of those Jews who did not survive nor had to leave on the hard circle between the years of 1933 and 45? I never got the answer. Even my friend gives me my friend, I call him a friend. It's embarrassing to him because his father was a Democrat like my father, and they both got arrested together. As not as a Jew so much as a Democratic former leader. It made no difference who they were. I know people, I know Jews, German Jews, who were wounded in World War I. My father fought. Didn't mean a thing. There was no preference given. In 1943, I'm not sure the year, the head of the SS came to Hitler and said, Germany is free of Jews, and that says it all. That was after the Wannsee conference in Berlin. That's about it.
When your father was away at prison, who ran the business?
There was no more.
What happened to them?
We just lived on what we had. They took the business away. The guy who was his partner was the Nazi leader in town. He took over. Not only did the business dissolved in itself. People were afraid to deal with Jews, and also the few cattle dealers. The Jews in my town weren't rich Jews. They were comfortable. They worked hard, but naturally, those who owed some of the Jews money for cattle never had to pay anymore. You know that. The business dissolved. People were afraid. I understand that. And when I went back, unfortunately, I went back a few days after the war. Nobody was guilty, of course. Nobody. And then I quoted to him who belonged to the Hitler Youth at the time. So this is all BS, quote unquote. You know that yourself.
During that period, as Hitler was in power and things were turning worse and worse, and your father was away, were there any kind of restrictions, curfews? Did you have to wear a yellow star? Anything?
No. Never wore a yellow star. Don't forget, we left in '37, went to France, until the American ship left out of the harbor of France to the United States. I never wore a star. We were, strangely enough, protected by for some reason, which I'm not aware of why. Obviously, what I said before, there was something big, and It's luckily my father wasn't found dead one night, so that's about it. I was able to go to my regular school, the public school, until 37. I still have my my school, where the marks are, what is it called? Oh boy, I'm losing the word.
Diploma?
Diploma. Not diploma, no, the monthly, yearly records. And there was great anti-Semitism, even among one or two teachers in school. In those days, I was beaten up several times because they knew my father was the leader of more or less of the Jews that were around. Not leader, he was the best known. Unfortunately, he was always active. He was very active as a county Democrat. Mm-hmm. And his picture was on record. He was lucky. He was very lucky. But his luck was based upon things that he must have known.
These things were, you say you were had some incidents of anti-Semitism. This is, you're in school. You're still going to school. This is when that happened.
They used to come outside. I remember the word. They used to, the Nazi kids, I'm talking of Hitler youth, from 6 years on, they used to march, and the bigger people outside of our house and down the street. It was a small village, and sing the song, Jewish blood, we're going to get you all. I still remember the poem. I still remember very well what they said.
In other words, they were marching down the street. You were just a bystander.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
A Jewish kid listening to them talk about that.
But you know what the sad part was? That I had to stand by in school when they sat and pledged allegiance to Hitler and talked about the Jews. They made us stand in school, in the schoolyard, which was a small school. We had no friends left. Everybody who was friendly before. I'm not talking of bums. I'm talking of educated people, lawyers, doctors, business people. They were afraid to talk to us. They were afraid that they would be arrested. The worst was the youth. They believed in Hitler. And Hitler did do one thing for them. He did create jobs which they did not have.
I'm wondering, as a kid, and especially being in a scene like that, being in school, and the rest of the kids, your classmates, friends, some of them, I'm sure, pledging allegiance to Hitler and speaking that way about you and speaking about your relatives that way. How did that make you feel in a moment like that?
I don't think at the time I fully comprehended what it would lead to. But my best friend, whose name is still to this day, and he calls me from Germany, Karl Kern, K-E-R-N, who became his father was a Democrat, and my friend became the Democratic mayor of the area. They had small towns, about 30 towns. And I didn't want to embarrass anybody at that time. And of course, he was in the Army. He was in the Navy during the war. He got out. I remember one thing which is very strange. This probably does not have part of this. I was with military intelligence at the time in France, and my job was to speak to the prisoners whom the division just captured, German prisoners. And of course we did know, I know this part of this, that the SS, before they were captured, they knew that, the SS always had under their right arm their tattoo. So what they did before they were captured, they always took the uniforms of dead German soldiers. But we knew about this, so my job was to say, and I was well trained in German. The American Army knew its business. They, open ranks, march, undress, and we picked them out. And one day, you won't believe, this is incredible. I said, let me try something. And I don't forget, I had one fear, by the way, all the time. I must interject him. I always took you know what dog tags are? I always took the dog tags and tore them up, because in those days, the dog tag had an H on. And believe me, if I would have been captured, I may just as well shot myself, because I wouldn't have survived, probably, if I would have ended up in an SS camp, because I know people who did survive. So anyway, one day I said, who is from the village of Flonheim? Guy came up to me, and I told him who I was. I was a corporal at the time, or a sergeant, I forgot. Said, my name is William Schmidt. I sat next to you in class. We interrogated this guy, and when we knew how strategic is what he knew, we sent him forward to higher echelon for interrogation, but we could not send him back to that prison camp for obvious reasons. He would have been killed by his own underground. He came to the United States, and I managed to see his mother and told her his son. He had better food here in Chicago than we did in Europe in the army. All right, that's neither here nor there, but it belongs to part of the philosophical thing.
In those years before you escaped, and your father was home, and then for long periods of time he wasn't home, I'm just curious about the living conditions that you had with your mother. You were still going to school, but
as long as we were living conditions. What do you mean by living conditions?
Was there an adequate amount of food?
Yes, there was. There was. And the vegetables we grew ourselves. What we couldn't get anymore, friends got to us and got us in the middle of the night. You know, they gave it. Money we still had enough. And the house was the few houses, and the second house we had to sell in order. We knew we'd leave, and we had to keep my grandfather around to have him taken care of. Even though he had money, he was in business.
Do you remember a time when your father came back from being in camp? Do you remember what that was like for you? I'm just trying to get an idea of
I think
like
I was too young to fully comprehend the situation. I forgot what it was, 8 or 9. I don't know the exact year anymore. He was arrested several times. A book, a very famous book, I don't know if you know, was written by a German who did his PhD on this situation. My father is in the book, quite. If you ever, I can give you the name. It's very interesting because it shows precisely in the county we lived in what happened to all those Jews, when they were arrested, how they were arrested, and how false the arrests were. This was a German who is now a professor in one of the universities in Germany. And the book was written in German. I got hold, somebody sent me the book. It's almost incredible to comprehend. It's almost how the people whom we've known for years and years, whom my father, my grandfather, and before him knew, and I can go back, that they could turn to this, become animals, so to speak. I don't know any other word for it. There have been things in 1492, the Spanish Inquisition. The Jews were given a choice, if I remember, to either change their religion, but there was no choice for the Germans. They were killed. And not only German Jews, Russian Jews, Polish Jews, no others than Jews. You know that. Anybody knows. It's to me, as long as I live. And to put it in a way that I have to be very careful. To me, I'll never understand the justice, okay, I will say no more, that this could happen. So many died, so many were killed. It's easy, it's just incomprehensible to me. Now, I live with this. I live so many times. I think of my grandfather when he was arrested. I knew of it. I knew the day he was arrested. I interrogated the people in the town, in the village. They couldn't help it. Of course they couldn't help it. It's gone too far. But you guys know the history. It is as well and even better than I do. I cannot forget it, even though my wife tells me she suffered a little more than I did, because she lived in France during 40 and 41, was never bothered, incidentally. She came to the United States via Spain. I could never believe it is, as far as I am concerned, in recent history, in past history, it's only Germany that committed the crime that they practically eradicated a whole people that lived in Europe. Period. That's it. I don't want to go into the other concept of it because I go into areas which may not be proper at this time.
As things were getting worse in Germany for you and your family, and your father came back, who made the decision, and when was it made that you were going to leave?
From the time, I forgot what year, whether it was the first jail or second jail, he met a guy who was his buddy in World War I, who was the warden of one of those jails. Notice I say jail, it was not concentration camp per se, except the first one. Mm-hmm. But that was run by SS already, but that was dissolved, that camp. There were over 250 camps, nobody knew. It was incredible, small, big. As a matter of fact, when I went back 4 years ago to that village and asked direction, some older people, where the camp, oh, we had no such camp in town. My friend, who was a non-Jew, was with me. He said, yes, you did. But when he asked the young people, they knew. Young people of 17, 18 knew where they played.
Why didn't the old people know?
They were ashamed. And of course, they were afraid that we might research and get their names and that they were guilty of some crime during that time. That's the only reason I have.
So when was the decision made on your father's part?
In about 1934, because it took us about 2 or 3 years for my grandfather's brother here to get the affidavit ready. And of course, and I will say this, this is the greatest country, but we had to go through Stuttgart. There was no more, when you came to this country, you didn't have to go through, what was the name of that place when you were examined? We were examined in Germany by American doctors in Stuttgart. Even there, they played with numbers. I can only allege that plenty of bribes were taken. You had to have numbers. And some of the clerks took, whether they were German or American, took money to push you ahead. You know, a lot is done. Mm-hmm. It took about 3 years to get out.
And you, the whole time you still lived in your house?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember what that was like when it was time to go? Do you remember what that was like, packing? Did you have...
we didn't pack. We, strangely enough, I was bar mitzvahed in April. I forgot what April. That night, as a matter of fact, another Jewish friend who still lived in town, who still was protected or something, took us out of town. We didn't go back to the house. We figured it was time to go. Somehow my father knew something which I was not aware of. We went to France, because previously we tried to go in through Switzerland, because my grandmother is from near Basel. They wouldn't let us in. We wanted to get out before to stay there, because money we still had some. We came to this country, we had to leave everything by with $45, 4 of us, my father, my mother, my sister, and myself, and my grandmother. Now, the strange part is that my mother went back from France into Germany. She had guts and arranged for the furniture to come over here. It happened. In the village, I must admit, basically, the anti-Semitism was at a minimum as far as we're concerned. There were just a few. And somehow my dad was able to contain their, I can't find the word. He managed. Whatever.
You had your bar mitzvah in April of '37. You mentioned also that you left that night of your bar mitzvah.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
When the bar mitzvah was over, I don't remember if we went back to the house or not, but somehow my dad must have known something that he couldn't protect us anymore. We left and we never came back. But we already had quietly gotten the passports or visas for France. And thank God we didn't stay in France, because my uncle's family was arrested by the French gendarme, by the French police, sent to Gurs, which you're well aware of, G-U-R-S, and from there sent east and killed. About 2 years ago, final records, I went to the to the Holocaust Museum, which I belong. I get all the information in Washington, D.C. And I went to their computer room or their record room on the 4th floor, and there's a book. Well, I don't know if this shows, about this thick, and it says Totenbuch, Book of Death of Jews. And I found my grandfather's name again. There were about 50 Germans by the name of Wolf, German Jews, who were in there. And how did I pick out my grandfather? There were plenty of Jacob Wolfs, because I knew his date of birth, and I knew previously when he was arrested in Germany, in Flonheim, and this showed the date of death again. I have those records home. And I took those records with me 2 years ago when I spoke at the high school, and because those kids spoke better English than I did, but I spoke in German, and I let them know the way I felt.
Take us back to that night of your bar mitzvah, and your father has gathered the entire family. And
I can't remember the details too well, but I know I was so nervous at the bar mitzvah. There was a Jewish family that lived next door that I fainted at the bar mitzvah out of fear. It had to be fear. It wasn't lack of food. I mean, I can't ever remember, I must say, we were short of food, but not hungry.
Your fear stemmed from fear of what?
I was 13 years old. I realized what could happen. As I said, we left at night. We left when most people didn't expect us to leave. No, we didn't go back. But why my mother had not the word is nerve, how she managed to go back. She went back from France. I have it on the visa. Got arranged for, I forget, ridiculous with the furniture and all that. Money, they didn't let you out with. Of course, the trouble is with especially the German Jews. I say this, and I know there are plenty of controversial views on this. It seems that the German Jews, I'm always told, were better Germans than Jews, I'm told. But they were Germans, like an American Jews in America. They thought that Hitler was only a passing fancy. Unfortunately, they didn't read Mein Kampf. Even in the late 30s, in the middle 30s, some people I do know, who could have gone to China, Japan at the time, to South America. Some people, they didn't go. They said, Hitler won't be here. It won't happen to us. And that's about as far as I remember.
And that was the majority.
There was never any prejudice before 1933, as far as I'm concerned. Because most of my friends were non-Jewish friends. That's the way it was.
Well, given that you grew up in that kind of atmosphere.
But excuse me, I kept saying non-Jewish. I consider myself German. That's what we were. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah. Given all that, your level of experience of anti-Semitism was fairly low.
Yeah.
And you were accepted as a German.
Yes.
Your family was accepted. How long?
Sure.
And a lot of people that could have gotten out did not get out.
A lot of people couldn't get out. A lot of people, I suppose, were older and were afraid to start a new life. Picture someone even in the 40s, not speaking whether it's Spanish or English, but there must. I don't know the statistics, but I know a few could have gotten out, and I know I'm going to get plenty of commentary on this probably. But I would presume, at the age I was, what I know of the time, they probably thought, but they couldn't. How could they think this in 37? They still, I don't know. Now they let, thank God, a lot of them that in my town were able to get their children to England or other places out, etc.
But what drove your father to do this? I mean, he had all the reasons to stay
What
there.
drove my father knows that he would have been killed. That's what he knows. He was beaten up enough times. I saw him beaten up.
You saw him?
Oh, yes, in town.
How did that happen? Can you talk about that?
Well, I can say it in very simple words. I know the details. There were Nazis to a degree. There were bastards. Yes, I used the word bastard, that hated Jews, and they were the low of the lows. But they were the people who hated for the sake of hate. Just like today, as I see the Arabs being pushed, they're being controlled by someone. There was an element of a Nazi party who pushed those guys to do the dirty jobs. Yeah, I've seen it. I was beaten up. I got the guy pretty well who beat me up. I was fortunate enough that he was in when my village was taken. I was not there at the time, unfortunately, because had I known, would I have been in the division while the French took that town? I'm sorry, this village would not have existed anymore if I could help it.
Your father was beaten up by people he knew?
By young Germans, yes. He knew everybody in town. He stayed away from those people. There were certain people in Germany, if I got there, in our village, that always had the hatred. We stayed away. I suppose, I don't know for what reason they hated so severely. They hated possibly because my father was in business, but the others were in business too. This was not a poor area. This was a pretty well-to-do area. Even farmers, mostly wine farmers, were in business. And of course, they succeeded. There are no German Jews. The Jews today, for example, I went back nearby in the town of Wiesbaden, which you all know about, and out of the 140, I went to synagogue, out of the 140 German Jews that were there's only one German Jew left. The rest are Russian and other Jews who I take my hat off to, who came in. I believe most all German Jews would not have gone back even if for any type of business. It was too deep. The hatred that was expressed through various means in the late 30s, and thank God I got out before the Crystal Night, because our synagogue was plundered, not destroyed. You know why a lot of synagogues were not destroyed on November 10th? You know that, don't you? For the same reason, because they were attached to non-Jewish businesses next door to. So the towns had to fight. They didn't destroy. They didn't permit anyone to destroy those. After the war, I went back. I didn't have much of a chance doing it because I was in the army. I had to go where you were told. After the war, I went back. And one of the people who took care, more or less, who fed for money, but nevertheless they took a big chance, came to me and brought a watch that my grandfather had, a gold watch, and gave it to me. And also gave me something which I treasure. I don't know whom to give it to, the Torah. In those days, today you bind the Torah with a piece of plastic. In those days, the Torah had a binding with my name on it when I was born and all that, and it was safe for me. So someone was nice, of course a non-Jew, and gave it to me about 10 years ago, 20 years ago. I went back. And that's what I will always blame. Let me, when I finalize this, say this much. I will always blame those people who were of mature age for Hitler, period. I don't have to go into details. I don't want to hear we were not responsible. None of it knew. I used to interrogate people. Says, don't tell me this. I don't want to go in with it. Says, you had, not what you call concentration. You had camps nearby. You knew the smoke that was going up. You knew the trains that came in. You knew nothing. So that was all. Those were lies. That's it. I try to tell you a little bit of what I remember.
Well, I wanna kind of fill in a little bit from the night of your bar mitzvah. You and your family left Germany. You went to France.
Yeah, I had an uncle in France, near Saumur, near the Loire region.
And that's where you went. You had,
yes, for 2 months.
How was it getting across the border?
No problem. It was legal. There's one thing about even the Germans. Well, they were not. Well, there was this, but the customs. They saw a legal passport. It was not a phony. A legal passport. It wasn't easy for my father. No, it wasn't easy for my father. He got the passport legally years before. It was valid. He forced probably the local official had the power, who was his former partner. He had something on him, okay? I never will know what it was, and I don't care.
And it was you, your sister, your mother, your father, and your grandmother.
I forgot if my grandfather went with, my grandmother came with us, not the grandmother from that town, my other grandmother, you know, that she was a widow. I don't remember if she came with us. I should know. Yes, she came with us. She came with us.
So you're at your uncle's house in France. How long did you stay there?
We left, our ship left Le Havre, France, May 18th, 1937. We were there until the day before. You should notice my uncle left Germany in 1933. He, through someone who had money, his cousin, bought a big chateau. What a chateau is well, you know what a big place near the Loire River. I know the village, but there's no sense. And he created, not only he started a farm, and he had 15 families come over from Germany. And my uncle was a very smart man. He taught them all a trade, and farming. Whether it was she had professionals of shoemaking. He figured most people would go from there, even from France to Israel, and that part of France became as anti-Semitic as anything ever existed. If we would not have gone out, our fate would have been the same as my aunt and 2 cousins. My uncle escaped from Gurs, tried to get my aunt out, but never made it. They ended up in Auschwitz. And this was the fault of the French. The French arrested him. And they had the nerve 2 years ago to invite me in that town to a memorial that they put up for the 18 Jews, 18 that were arrested and went east. I told him, don't you dare. And my uncle wrote 2 books, by the way. My uncle came to this country, remarried, established a business, but he lost his hearing, he was beaten to hell in camp. But he was a very strong leader. He died in Pennsylvania. I visited him every year with the age of 101. Never had a sick day. He wrote 2 books. I suppose the books are recorded in Washington, D.C. I have them.
And
his son was killed. His daughter was killed. One of the books was Letter to My Son. Letters to My Son.
And you were there in France for about 3 months before you left.
Yes.
And then you boarded ship and came straight to America.
My uncle wanted us to stay in France. I guess but first of all, my father didn't like farming. He didn't like that. Thank God we didn't. But maybe my father was well aware of the French attitude, of which he knew France well. Yes, we came over here in March. We left 18th of May. We got here the 26th of March. The name of the ship was the SS Washington. Comfortably. We came away in comfort.
When you arrived here in America, you arrived in New York?
Yes.
Did anyone meet you that your relatives?
Yeah. Yes.
And you lived with them, I would imagine.
No.
Okay.
No. My grandmother's brother got us an apartment in his house in Brooklyn. In a good mixed neighborhood. That's why my father came over and he said, no more German books, no more German speech. We will only speak English. And that's why he learned. Well, he was pretty young. He was born in 1896. So he was, in 37, he was only 41, 42 years old. Mm-hmm. He was a thin man, but a tough man.
Did you speak English when you got here?
I took, unfortunately, for years I took French private lessons, the wrong ones. I spoke a little English, yeah, because I took about 3 months of English lessons. But I mixed quickly. Luckily, the school teacher, even though I was 13 years old, I started in public school, 2nd or 3rd grade, just until I learned English. But I was always ahead in math, because the European mathematics was far advanced at the time. And I learned English very quickly, because I associated with American guys only. I learned, I did have one obsession, and I suppose my wife will laugh when she hears that, and I guess that obsession never left me, unfortunately. I always loved to eat good things, and being that I didn't have it over there, when I came to this country in the beginning, we didn't have it. Later on, when I could afford it, I always made sure I got the best. And it's almost a compulsion, which I can't get rid of.
When you went to high school,
I went to high school. A friend of mine came over the same time. I went to high school. I wanted to go to work because I wanted to help my father out. My father worked. He said, no, you're going to go to high school. I had 3 jobs at the same time. I worked so hard over here on job that I was one of the few guys who didn't have time to play baseball, okay? But I went to City College and I taught school for a while in Brooklyn. Mm-hmm. See, when we came here in Brooklyn, we moved to a neighborhood. It was a non-Jewish neighborhood, but with Jews in the neighborhood. And I always used to go to synagogue on Shabbos, but not because I loved to go to synagogue. I must be around because the food was so good that we got there all the time. Don't forget, we came away. We had enough. We had not, yeah, I guess, but not good food anymore. And everybody helped us over here. And my uncle did come after 2 months, and he said, where's the money for the rent? I just have to say that, so. But my dad worked. He got a job, thank God, through the through HIAS, H-I-A-S, or the American Jewish Committee, I forget, but he got a job. He worked very hard. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, he passed away in 1950, leukemia.
Associating with mostly American kids, some Jewish, some not Jewish, overall, what was their attitude in accepting you, a foreigner from Germany? Was there any problems in that?
Yes.
Did you talk about that?
Now wait a minute. I was 13 when I came here. We didn't have any money left. I don't think. Thank God I had a cousin, my uncle's, my grandmother's uncle, son was very friendly with me, and he took me around, synagogue and here and there, jobs I always had. What was the attitude? The attitude of the American kids in school, they used to call me Ref, Believe me, I had plenty of fights. And when I used to come home, my father said, you may have a bloody nose, what does the other guy have, And I gained their respect. I was pretty bright. Well, not bright. I studied. I knew I wanted to go to college. I knew then already, because my father was pretty educated. Not college educated, but he read well, and he was well educated otherwise. And he said, it's school. You've got to go to university, to college. And that's what I did.
I'm just curious, as you got older and war started, you were a teenager.
I was 18.
What was that like for you, knowing that you still had relatives over there? Did you hear about the treatment, concentration camps, about the Jews while you were here?
Yeah, I didn't know if my grandfather, and let me tell you something, I loved my grandfather a great deal. I don't say that now. I many times shed a tear what happened to him, because I lived with him. Greatest. In those days, don't forget, he was only in his 60s, but he was an old man already. In those days, when you were 60, you were old. I'm 78. I wonder how my kids look at me today. Anyway, I try to stay young. What was your question? Excuse me.
Well, I'm wondering how you felt, knowing that the war was going on. You were from that part of the world, and you knew what was happening to the Jewish people in that world. What was your feelings being here in America towards that?
My feelings were partly of guilt. Guilt of one thing. I used to ask my father, why couldn't you get your dad out? My grandmother, my other grandmother, my mother's mother, but why couldn't you get, I know that's what, why couldn't you get your father out? It comes back to the same thing. They didn't tell me that night that we were leaving, because I would not have left my grandfather. I couldn't have left him. They didn't tell me. It was tough. It was tough. When I think of it, as tough as I am, I shed a tear often. And how did I feel? I don't think I fully comprehended. I had a feeling, I was hoping he might still be alive in 41, which he was. And I said to my father, why didn't you get him out? In those days, my grandfather was in his 60s. He had to get a number. The number was too high to get him out on time. He couldn't go anywhere alone, and nobody helped him. Even, I hate to say it, I have to say allege in case, I'm sure there's controversiality on this. Even some of his relatives who were still there, out of selfishness, that by getting him out, they lose a number. When I say number, I mean the American consulate in Stuttgart, the clerks, whether, I don't know if they were German, gave out numbers. There would have been no problem with getting him out on a ship. The money came from here. My father worked very hard, and so did I. And I suppose I forgave my father, and yet I wonder many times. He did everything he could, because he had a sister who was here, whom we brought here. No, relatives, but somehow my grandfather wasn't able to do it. We couldn't bring him with us because he was not ready. My father had to go that day, I think. He must have known something. He would not have gone that day. You know what I'm talking about, that day, on my bar mitzvah night.
Did you marry when you got here?
Yes.
Okay. And children? Do you have children?
Yes.
How many children do you
3.
have?
I have twin boys and a girl.
When you were here in this country, was there ever any talk about to your friends about the Holocaust and about what it was like in Germany, about your father being in prison, that kind of thing?
Yes, I'm asked all the time, and what I say now, I will say it because I have to say it. I blame not the Jews, basically, but the Jewish organizations and the American government at the time. They knew. We had representatives at the embassies, at the consuls. We had CIA, intelligence over in Germany. They knew what was going on. Okay, I won't go into further, and I do blame. The one thing I will never forget, that you know during whose administration, Even though England were not known as the greatest, you know how their feeling was towards Israel, yet I just saw the film the other day, a kinder transport. England took in a few thousand children and we did not. And you know about the ship in 1939 that landed here, that couldn't land in New York. And you know part of the people never survived. And the captain of that ship, who was nice enough, a German captain, did not take most of the people back to Germany. He dropped them off somewhere else. Okay, I don't want to go into that because it may be misinterpreted. I love this country, it is the greatest. I couldn't wait to get into the army in 1942, December. I went overseas in 43. I was overseas 2.5 years. D+2 is when I landed in France.
When you, just to digress a moment, when you went back to Europe with the Army, did you go back to your hometown?
Not with my units. I was in France. At the time, I was assigned to a prison camp in France, to a German prison camp as an interrogator, at the time. I went back when I found out my town, which was 100 miles, 150 miles, my village was taken, the French-occupied village. I managed to get permission to go back with a buddy of mine, well protected. I went to the office of the French commander. I went in my town and said, look, I'm here for one reason only. I don't have time to stay here. I only got a half a day, a few hours, to arrest who has to be arrested. But there's one guy I know is here, and I have to do what I have to do. And the French commander said, okay, off the record, you know. And I did what I had to do. He's alive. He was alive after that. When I went back, he must have reported me, and I had a choice of a small court-martial or a bust. I took the bust.
This was, you went back to see a fellow who mistreated you.
Yeah. I didn't back to see him. No. I went back to see my present friend's father and mother. My father's friends who were back. He was now mayor, appointed by the French or Americans or English, whoever took the town as mayor of the town, as a Democrat mayor of the town. But yet, in all things that I never forgive him for, the village has never, in a small place, put up a small memorial like they did in all the towns around, in towns nearby. And I asked my friend, who was mayor at one time, why? And to this day I don't buy the answer, that the town council did not vote to do this. I says, you had enough power to do this. Anyway, that's neither here. He's still, because his father, my father, and he is my friend, and I understand he had limitations, but I don't want to go into the detail. We are in constant communication. And he is a Democrat, and he tells me what goes on, even again now. I let him know. I write him articles. I send articles from a paper called, in German, the Aufbau. It's in German. I don't know if you ever heard of that paper. Well, it's all the German Jews buy this paper. It's published here. You know why they buy it? The old-timers say, who died? They want to see the columns, who's still alive and who died.
Did you go back and see your parents' house where you grew up?
Yeah, good shape. My parents' house, my father needed money. He went into business over here for a while in 1950, and he sold it. It was a very nice house with a factory in the back.
Yeah, even though it...
in 1950.
And he still had possession, ownership of that house.
He had to fight for the ownership.
Who took over the house after you left?
I don't remember precisely. I'll tell you how it was taken over, just like the synagogue. The Nazi Party took it over and put a Nazi into a Nazi, a loyal Nazi with the old that guy who was a Nazi for years and years, put it in there. We took a lawyer. We didn't get the money we ever want because I believe the lawyer over there helped the other side more, helped the defendants more than more or less the prosecutor on the other end. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. I should have done much more, but you know, I had a job, I went through college, I had priorities, I did what I could to this day. I wrote recently, my son, I'm strangely enough, my son who lives outside of one of my twin sons, Philadelphia, about a year ago asked me to get up early, which I do in the morning, and write the history of my life since I knew it since I was 5-year-old. I wrote it. I don't type well anymore since college, so I wrote it by hand, send it to him. I'm waiting for him to computerize it. But so he is interested.
Have you ever discussed the Holocaust with your children?
Yes,
and
they're well aware.
And your father's part of it?
Yeah, yeah. But when I say the Holocaust, give me an interpretation of what you mean by the Holocaust.
Well, certainly...
I was not in camp.
Certainly you weren't in camp, but certainly your father went through some experiences
Yes.
directly because of the Nazis.
Do you know, they had the nerve to invite me, well, not the nerve, they invited me to a dedication ceremony at that one camp, and I have to admit an organization took it over as a museum. And my father's name was on, you know, one of the scrolls. He was beaten up. They were mostly non-Jews, but as a Jew he was beaten up. Strangely enough, after 1 year, they closed that camp. They closed it because the camp wasn't tough enough, and it was too close to an area, well, whatever, I don't know, it wasn't suited.
As we close, what do you feel is the most important lesson to be learned about the Holocaust?
That lesson that I feel that our kids, our children, whether they're Jewish or non-Jewish, should know what the Holocaust was all about. But it should be told by people, as long as they're alive, so far still, who were in the Holocaust. And it should be told, not because it's taught in school, I've seen it. It should be taught with feeling, should be taught with a record of knowledge of those who tell the story or related to its actuality. Too often, and I myself, do I read stories, what is going on dictatorially in Africa, people are killed, and I have to be honest, I can't feel the same as I feel about the Holocaust. This story must be told and told and told, and too many people forget. Even our own Jews will forget after a while. No, not forget, they won't forget. The Jews who went through it won't forget, and their children won't forget. But I'm afraid as everything else, in the next generation, it will be forgotten. And I say this, you want me to say it in conclusion, I'm going to be careful how I say it. Where is justice to those who have died the hard way? Not only Jews, there were plenty of non-Jews in the Holocaust who died. Where is the justice? Where is the justice? I don't want to go further because then I'd be, you know what I'm going to say. Where is the justice that so many people, I have a friend, our closest friend, she saw in Auschwitz by Mengele, the father was taken to the left and burned, burned in the ovens. Where is justice?
Before we close, is there anything you should like to mention about your experiences that happened during that period before you left that hasn't been covered here? Is there anything you'd like to add?
There were organizations in this country in the 30s, Jewish organizations, that could have gone to our then president and advised him, but strongly, because we had Jews who were under, you know what president we're talking about? Yes, under President Roosevelt. And they could have done more. But I understand fully why, possibly, at least some of my research through monthly records of synagogues I've read, that possibly those Jewish organizations were afraid if they pronounced that situation too strongly would affect anti-Semitism and cause an increase. But that's not good enough. That's not reason enough. I hope it never happens again. I hope that the world realizes, or the countries that demonstrate before it happens. But I also understand, and I'll say this as a Jew now, and I am a good Jew, even though I don't run the synagogue, or I do on my holidays. I do realize this. We have survived for generations, and we as Jews will have survived, because otherwise we would have been gone already. And I do understand that there is a limit, and there is a certain amount of a mixture of marriages. That's fine. That's the way history is. But I do resent, and I say this openly and freely, I have a right to say this, I do resent those ultra, not conservative, those ultra organizations, Jewish organizations, who can say the things they've said about the Jews, that there is a partial, it was said by someone in Israel recently, I can also, what was said to me is unforgivable. Only those who were through it, whether they were in camp or not, who have seen what happened can understand, and it will be remembered this time. And that's one of the reasons I came here and other places to bring this up.
Thank you very much for being with us today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for being.
This has been Michael Spavin interviewing Paul Wolf, about his experiences as a child survivor of the Nazi Holocaust. This interview will be added as a valuable contribution to the Oral History Library of the Holocaust Documentation and Education Center, Incorporated.